to do. Because at one time I'd have been like Megan and I'd have been bouncing all over the place. The reading for today is Luke chapter 19, starting at verse 28. After Jesus had said this, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. As he approached Bethsaida and Bethany at the hill called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it to here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you untying it?' say, 'The Lord needs it.'" Those who were sent ahead went and found it just as he had told them. As they were untying the colt, its owner asked them, "Why are you untying the colt?" They replied, "The Lord needs it." They brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on the colt, and put Jesus on it. As he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. When he came near the place where the road goes down to the mount, down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in a loud voice for all of the miracles they had seen. "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest." Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." "I tell you," he replied, "if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." You know, if we keep quiet, God will give our praise and glory to somebody else. That's what that's saying. If my disciples keep quiet, even the stones will cry out. You are not going to stop what I am going to do. Don't matter what other people say, we have to cry out for Jesus. We have to be solid in what we believe and what we say. But we have to say it with joy. You know, too often, especially in the past, I remember when I first started going to church. That's why I love the kids running around in a service. When I first started going to church, I would walk into church. I remember going as a Boy Scout or as a Cub Scout when I first went to church. And we paraded down in a joyful procession. We got to the church, we walked through the door, and we had to be quiet. It was absolute silence. And we'd sing these songs that were not particularly exciting in most cases. Some of them were. But for a young lad that didn't have any faith or background in church, they didn't particularly grab me. The best thing in the service was when the collection plate came along and you put your money in and you took your change out. And you took out more change than you put in. In fact, the church that we used to parade to started bringing the collection plate to the Cubs and Scouts first, because they found out that when they brought it to them last, they lost more than what they gained. But there it was in church and had no real effect. Why? Because the people around me seemed to be somber. They didn't have any joy. They weren't particularly excited about Jesus. Or so I thought. That's the impression I got. And too often, as Christians, we give that impression. We're not excited about Jesus. Why? Because we're not willing to shout about him. We're not willing to say who he is. We're not willing to proclaim that Jesus is alive. You see, Jesus expects quite a bit of his disciples. There is a thing called obedience. And we get it in this story. You know, I don't know about you, but if somebody came to me and said, I want you to go on ahead and you're going to go into this town and you're going to find a donkey tied up. I want you to untie it and bring it to me. I'd tell them where to go. I said, if you want the donkey, you go get it. You're not landing me in trouble. But you know, his disciples had that obedience. And they believed what Jesus said to them. How often does Jesus tell us to do something and we go, I ain't going to untie that donkey because I ain't getting into trouble? And it can be all sorts of things. It can be words of knowledge, prophecy. He could tell us to go and lay hands on somebody. And we go, I ain't doing that. I might look a fool if it goes wrong. That's the same as saying, I ain't going to go and untie the donkey. You know, Jesus wants us to be obedient and be joyful in our obedience. What happened when they were obedient? They got to where the donkey was. They started to untie it. And just like Jesus had said, the man says to them, what do you think you're doing? I think Luke writes it quite politely, to be honest. I think the guy that would have come out would have said more than what he's written down. And in an angry sort of sense of, if somebody were untying my donkey or coming in and getting in my car, I'd be out of the door saying something to them. But when they replied what Jesus had told them to reply, the man was already prepared. He knew that Jesus was going to send for the donkey, that the Lord needs this animal. And so he was already prepared. And sometimes when we send to somebody to talk to them, they're already prepared for what we're going to say. They don't know what we're going to say, but they're already prepared because God said, I'm going to send somebody to you. I'm going to give you some information you need. And that can be anything. I've gone to people and said all sorts of weird and wonderful things that made no sense to me whatsoever. I once went at a conference, loads of people I didn't know, and there was a guy 4 rows in front of me. And God just said to me, I want you to go tell him everything's going to be all right. And I said to Jesus, I said, I'm not going to go tell him that. It don't make any sense. What's going to be all right? He said, you don't need to know what's going to be all right. Just go tell that man everything's going to be all right. And after a bit of argument with Jesus, I went and told this man. I said, okay, Jesus, I'll go do it. And I went forward, 4 rows forward, complete stranger. I said, excuse me, but I believe Jesus is saying this to you. Everything is going to be all right. And this man just broke down in tears. And he wept. And I'm not just talking a few tears rolling down his cheek. He wept. And I said, what's wrong? He said, I just needed to hear that. He said, I'm a minister of a church, and the church decided they needed an extension. He said, and so we went ahead with this extension. And I went and got a mortgage, and it's all in my name. He said, and the church have now said they never wanted the extension, and it's all down to you. So this poor minister was left with a mortgage in his name that he had to pay off. And God was just saying to him, it's all going to be all right. Now, I don't know the end of that story. That's as far as I ever got to know. But what I'm saying is, that minister needed to know those words. didn't make any sense to me, but to him, it meant everything. When the disciples got to the man with the donkey, just saying, the Lord needs this, meant everything to that man. He understood it, and so they could take the donkey. So, it's all right, mums and parents are dealing with things. But Jesus wants us to get excited. Okay? Jesus wants us to be the people that walk forward with him. Jesus wants us to be the people that stand on the Mount of Olives and shout out. Why do we shout out? So others will join in. So others will jump up and down. And what are they going to sing? Hosanna.